Many of the ideas, strategies, and practices that we're going to be talking about together today, actually, a lot of us in this room have been co-teachers with me, so thank you for being here as well. And I guess the biggest thing that I want to say is what I'm about to share with you is based on my own experience and research with leaders like yourselves in schools and in other kinds of organizations. And so what I'm offering is sort of the best of what they have taught me and I have learned from them and you. Okay, so we're going to do three things. I think about this talk as sort of an appetizer. Hopefully you'll be interested enough to dive into the book. But basically I'm going to be sharing some of the bigger ideas, practices, and strategies behind what I call a new learning-oriented model for leadership development. And as Victoria said, I think about adult development as being leadership development and leadership development as being adult development. And so while this book focuses a lot on schools and educational organizations, I actually think it's more about life and relationships in general and how we can help each other grow. So I'm going to introduce this model, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how different features, strategies, and practices can inform the way we shape learning contexts, and that is in the broadest sense to help leaders, which I also define very broadly, to grow and develop. And one thing that we have learned for sure is that we all need help with growing and developing. None of us can do it on our own. So that's the second thing we'll focus on, how to do that. And then I'm going to say a little bit about the importance of self-development and renewing, or what I call refilling the self in order to be able to give to others. So that's our plan for the day. So adaptive challenges are prevalent in education today. Actually, Ronnie Heifetz is someone who coined that term, and he distinguishes adaptive from technical challenges. Technical challenges are those kinds of problems that we face where even if we can't solve them ourselves, someone else can. We know what the problem is and there's an identifiable solution. Adaptive challenges, on the other hand, are challenges for which we really aren't even sure what the problem is. Not only that, but no one seems to have a solution, and so what they require is the capacity to handle tremendous amounts of ambiguity and complexity. And these are not just challenges that principals and superintendents and district level leaders face, but they're actually challenges that teachers of all kinds and in all kinds of institutions face. And so the reason that it's really important to support development or growth, to increase our cognitive, affective or interpersonal, affective or emotional, interpersonal, the way we relate to other people, and the way we relate to ourselves in today's world, is because we need greater capacities that are internal to be able to manage the kinds of problems we face. And I thought maybe some examples might be for K through 12 level educators, but also for university people. The Common Core standards, the complexity of just educating today, in today's world, the different forms of evaluation and accountability that we need to be able to manage. And I'm sure if I gave you, this is what I would normally do, a minute to think about your own adaptive challenges, something that's pressing and very challenging for you in your work, that you feel is a developmental challenge for you to face. I'm sure that we could each name at least one. And so the importance of this work, I think, is around how can we shape environments, learning environments, whether they're university classrooms, the teams on which we work, councils in which we serve, and professional learning initiatives, to be places where adults are not only learning information, but they're actually having opportunities to grow, to transform themselves, to develop greater capacities. And so that's why I'm going to use the words internal capacity building interchangeably with growth. So, and as I started to say at the very beginning, that we can't grow alone. So that's like a common challenge that we face, and that we need other people's help. And part of the problem is that for a long time, we didn't know how to do that, and we didn't know what kinds of practices would actually enhance our growing in our different workplaces and lives. One big idea that you might find yourself resonating with is that we now know, it's been proven by research, that if we support adults' development, that it has a direct and positive impact on student achievement. So that's kind of where we're beginning, and that's where this book begins. So the question is, how can we do that? And why is it so difficult to do? So I'm going to give you a little glimpse into the work that kind of informs this work, because I thought that might be helpful. And one particular theory that informs both this work and other work that I've had the privilege of doing with leaders like yourselves is constructive developmental theory, which is a neo-Piagetian theory. And while I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, it's a family of theories. And one particular theory that I find very useful, it was developed by Bob Keegan. He was my mentor and now very cherished friend. And there are three big ideas that you might find meaningful that inform the ways we can think about shaping learning environments for growth. The first one is that as adults, we make meaning of our experiences in very different ways. And because of that, we need to think about differentiating the kinds of supports and challenges we can embed in learning situations, just like we do for youth and children. So what feels supportive to one person, for example, having the opportunity to critique ideas, give feedback, engage in conflict, might feel overly challenging for someone who has what I call a different way of knowing. So that's the second idea, differentiation. And the third is that holding environments, D.W. Winnicott was a developmental psychologist and pediatrician who developed this concept known as the holding environment, and he brought it up to mean that when an infant is born and is growing through early years of life, we need different forms of holding, physical and emotional. And Bob Keegan extended that idea to say, no, hey, you know what? As adults and throughout our lives, we need to have holding environments in order to grow. Growth doesn't stop when someone turns 21 or at whatever age you consider to be an adult. And so this construct of the holding environment at the individual level is something that has been, established. Watch out for that stool. And the way in which this work kind of contributes and extends that concept is to present the idea that we need to think about holding environments not just at the individual level, but also at the collective level. And how can we do that? How can we shape contexts that attend to both individuals and groups, regardless of setting? So what I want to say up front, just in case you're wondering, is that I understand that this is like kind of one set of lenses. It's not the set of lenses. We all have different lenses, and the value of lenses or frameworks is that they shed light on a particular aspect of our experience. Just like this model that I'm about to present to you is something, it's a framework that you might find helpful, and I guess my biggest hope for you today is that you feel like you walked away with something meaningful, either for yourself and your personal and professional development, or for those you care about and serve. But basically, I have been following this question of how can we support adult learning and development for a really long time, ever since I was a teacher in middle and high school. And my work has kind of followed that question, beginning with interviewing and conducting research with principals around how do they think they support adult development and what practices do they use and how do they renew themselves. That kind of was, it generated and extended a model that I had researched in my dissertation. And then Becoming Adult Learners is a book where we worked with adults who come from different countries who don't speak English as a first language to understand from them what are the kinds of things that happen in their workplace learning programs that help them learn and grow and develop capacities as parents, workers, and citizens. Leading Adult Learning, Victoria talked a little bit about, is a book that focuses on how do other adults do these kinds of things. It extends the theory to learning-oriented leadership, to thinking about assistant principals, coaches, other kinds of individuals, as well as principals and teachers who serve in schools. And today we're going to be talking about helping educators grow, which offers a model for leadership development. And this other book, Leading and Learning for Growth, is not out yet, but it's a book that people always ask, well, that's great that you do that you actually, go out and work with educators in the field, or you create these contexts within university classrooms, but like, what do people do after they leave those contexts? Do they ever think about or use those ideas? Again, so this is a study that actually asks that question of people who engaged in these kinds of experiences from 7, 8, and 9 years ago. So stay tuned. So this is not only a model that gives a lot of strategies and practices, but it's also a model that holds as one of its big premises that in order to help people understand really, in a true sense, how to support each other's growth, they have to experience it. That helps them to do it, to be able to help themselves and other people. And it's very purposeful work. As we all know, we're all designers of learning in one context or another, and anything that we do in our classrooms, in our teams, in our schools, is intentional. Things like this don't happen by accident. So it takes a lot of planning, which is something I'm going to talk with you about. This kind of model has a lot of intentionality behind it, both developmental and otherwise. It's needed because the kinds of challenges that we're facing today they often outpace what we can actually do. And so I invite you to think about this, the rings in the circle, which is part of the model, as sort of like a giant redwood. And we are not going to be able to get into all of it, but what I was hoping is to share some of the highlights with you and to whet your appetites. How's that? Okay. So I know you can't really see this model so well, but it begins with a central dot, and I consider these to be growth rings, and they're all interconnected. And I'm gonna walk you through the different growth rings of the model. Each of them has several components to it, but the importance of the central dot is that we all start with ourself. Who we are and how other people relate to us definitely influences how we can support these contexts and build them for supporting development and learning. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. You can't really see the squiggly lines so well in this light, but you can't see them there either. Anyway, there are squiggly lines here that go like that, and it's to show that the central components or core values, core elements, influence every other ring. And the nice thing about this, I think something that's really cool and I'm excited to share, is that there are many people in our room right here today who come from different contexts and work with different people. And my work actually is also like that. So I built this model based not only or not just on working with teachers or working with principals or working with assistant principals or facilitating learning opportunities for principals, working with principals, or working with doctoral students or working with aspiring leaders. It's kind of all of them. And so their stories and my stories and learnings from them inform the model. So I really think about this book as kind of a gift that I'm giving you for the gifts that other people have given me. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly walk through the most global framework of this model, and then I picked out certain things that I thought might be helpful in terms of strategies and practices and takeaways that are informed by theory and research. So the first, and this is actually not only the outline of the model, starting with the central dot, moving to the core elements, moving to senses and strategies, how those play out, and throughout the other rings, but it's actually the way the book is organized as well. So as I said, there's a central dot, which is who we bring to our work, to our design of professional learning experiences and communities. And then the second ring, which includes things like listening with presence and using language thoughtfully. Using language thoughtfully is so important. What we say and how we say it shapes the context and also shapes opportunities for growth. I call that senses and strategies. And then the next ring, which includes design, logistics, planning, and when I say logistics and planning, I don't mean planning only before the event. I mean planning and being aware of what's going on in the room, paying attention to it, and sort of staying with the people in the learning experience as well. It happens before, during, and after. I know it's something to grab hold of, like planning can happen after the event, but it does. And then nuances, which are really the little things that make a tremendous difference. Things like, how do we respond when we have a lot to say and a very limited amount of time, and someone asks a question? What do we do with that? How do we create spaces where people actually have enough sort of room to ask what I would consider to be the burning issues on their minds, discussion, writing, thinking, sharing? How do we build those spaces? How do we balance all of that? And the importance of pacing and transparency are some of the other things which I'll talk about later. So the last part of this model is all about moving from the inner circle to the outer circle and then back again. So how do we, after giving and shaping these contexts for other people, how do we refill ourselves? How do we renew ourselves? And what kinds of opportunities can we, bless you, create for ourselves so that we can continue growing and being able to give? And that's what we're going to end with today. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little reflective moment just to kind of ground yourself in your own work context. And I'm going to invite you to think about or write about one of these questions, and I'll read them out loud. How would you describe the professional development or professional learning opportunities in your work context? So in your school, in your team, or in your school system. How do you think other people would describe those same opportunities? What, from your perspective, is working well? What do you do that you think really works well for you or for other people? What are the biggest challenges you face in offering these kinds of opportunities? Or what would you like to improve? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about one of those questions. And just so you know what we're going to do, I'm going to give you 1 minute to think or free write, having the choice to do either one that feels okay to you. And then I'm going to invite you to connect with one other person in this room and to just share whatever you feel comfortable sharing about A, which question you selected and why, and B, anything that you would like to share about your experience with that question. Okay, so normally what I would do is ask you if you wanted to share anything that you had been talking about, but since we only have this little precious piece of time, I'm going to move on into the next part. So I'm going to walk you through the different rings right now. And we begin with the center, or what's known as the central dot. It's kind of the things that make us up, who we are. And one of the quotes that I open up this section with in the book is by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who says, "Who you are is speaking so loudly that I can't hear what you're saying." So I thought that was powerful, and that's kind of who we are in any learning context, team context, school environment. People, just like kids, youth, they figure you out right away, and within minutes, they decide if they're going to trust you or not. Yes, lots of heads nodding. So that's important. It influences how we can shape these spaces and create learning opportunities for other adults. And we all have these, what I would call central dots. We have core essences of ourselves. And for me, a few of the things that compose what I think of as my central dots are people who have influenced my life, family members, friendships, experiences, educational and otherwise, both good and bad. They have influenced how I think about teaching and learning and leading and all of that. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to give you a chance to think about your central dots and what might be some of the core elements that you see as really, really important. just as in teaching and learning, I share a lot of personal stories, and the reason that I do is personal connections, building them, extending them, and deepening them is a way that I can connect with people in learning contexts, and I also invite them to do the same. So that's one of the components of the model, just so that in case you wonder, is she going off on a lot of tangents? Why does she tell so many stories? That's why. Yes, that was supposed to be funny. Okay, so extending out from this central dot are what I consider to be the core elements, the kinds of things that I think are very important and that I have found other people think are very important and appreciate in terms of the research I've done, had the privilege to do with leaders and teachers like yourselves. So for me, those are things like care, respect, trust, collaboration, and intentionality. There are two things I wanted to say about this. In the book, if you read it, you'll see that I actually define those as they're typically defined in dictionaries, and then I offer my definition of them. And when the editor and the copy editor kept saying, why do you need to define these things? I'm like, because most of us take for granted that we mean the same thing when we use these words, and we don't necessarily. So, and the other really important thing that I want to say is that these are linked to what I've found in another research project that we're naming preconditions. And preconditions have to do with how adults feel like if you don't have these things, respect and trust, you can't go about employing a model like this and helping people grow and develop, because you need people to believe that A, you have good intentions, and B, you are going to support their development. So you have to, it has to be, as Terry Malpio would say, the audios have to correspond with the visuals. So what they see and what they hear have to connect. Okay, so we're moving to the second growth ring, which, as I said before, has to do with sensing and being. And this really has to do with who we are and what we pay attention to in a room. It has to do with how we listen, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples around listening and the importance of language, how we build relationships, and the value of modeling when you're trying to support other people's growth and development. Being someone who was also interested in learning and growing is one of the key features. And it's also not just about saying things, but it's about embodying them, as we all know. So I thought I'd share a little bit around listening and the importance of language. Research has shown that the quality of our listening is a developmental support. I don't know about you, but at least I know I can tell whether or not someone is listening, even if I can't see them, or even if they don't say a word. You can feel it. It's palpable. So how do you communicate that in a room, in a relationship, on a team? How do we do that? I work a lot with teacher leaders who are aspiring to take on more leadership in their schools, and at one of the developmental leadership academies that I was facilitating, I had the pleasure of working with them over time, 4 sessions. This one I gave, so we would learn some things, and then they would go out and practice with their coachees, with the people they were mentoring, and then they would come back and they would refine what I call their design plans. And so this one woman, she was like a 30-something, like, you know, very talented teacher, said that one of the things that she was, kindergarten teacher in a charter school, said that one of the things that she was working on is really listening to people. And like stopping what she was thinking to just actually listen to understand what they were saying. And she was, you know, talking about how hard that is to actually do. But you know it when someone's really listening to you. So other examples that have to do with language as an important component of what I would consider to be these core elements is just even think about feedback. How do we give other people feedback? I was working with a group of leaders, and this one principal who, before learning about these ideas, he's a principal at a school in Lebanon, actually. He said that when he used to have to give his teachers feedback, he would look up their Myers-Briggs, how they, seriously, because that's a very popular assessment tool used in schools, and that's how he would think about approaching them for feedback. And one of the things that he found really valuable was to think about feedback from a developmental perspective. And it helped him to understand that sometimes we can give someone feedback and we wonder, why aren't they doing what we asked them to do? The reason is they couldn't take it in a lot of times. Not that they don't want to do it, it could also be that they just can't do it. Another school leader, and this is a common theme in my research, said that he learned that he used to give feedback the way he liked to get it, directly, without a lot of soft cushions around it. And he wondered why the people on his leadership team weren't doing what he asked them to do. And so what he learned was to differentiate, and that links back to that earlier concept that we talked about. Okay, I think that's enough on that. So now I'm going to give you another chance to think privately, and this is a pass or play kind of a thing, not a demand, but to just think about what is it that sort of informs your own central dot. And what are, if you had to name, you know, and even if you have one that's kind of jumping out in front of you, that's A-okay and fine. What do you think are the core values that inform the way that you are present with people when you're trying to support their growth and development? So it's kind of like thinking about your own central ring. And you know what I'm noticing? That's so light, but anyway, that's the dot and that's the central ring. So this is going to be 2 minutes to kind of just either free write whatever's coming into your mind, or to just think privately about what is it that you think are the important things that shape your own central dot, and what are some of the core values when you're working with other adults in relationship, whether it's one-on-one, a team, a larger group, a classroom, an organization. What do you bring to those relationships that inform you? So we're going to have 2 minutes for just being quiet or writing, and then we'll have a chance to share a little bit. And so I thought I would say a little bit about the outer growth rings. There's a lot in here, and there are a lot of practices and strategies in the book, and they are offered to think about designing and facilitating from sort of a developmental perspective. So I'm going to share a couple of what I would consider to be practical strategies and takeaways that might be of use today to you, well, not only today, but hopefully in the future, rather than going through all of them. And I'm going to say a little bit more about nuances and things that help to create the space for learning and development. And it's kind of like, the one thing that I did want to point out is, so I have developed, based on research, a model that's called a learning-oriented model of leadership, and I've written about that in other books, and I've been refining it since 1991, actually. And so these are pillar practices: teaming, providing adults with leadership roles, engaging in collegial inquiry, and mentoring or developmental coaching that you've probably heard of. So they're like practices that we all know about. But the difference is that they can be employed with developmental intentions to support growth and development. And so it kind of reminds me of so those practices, each one could be a swimming pool, but it's kind of like what's in the water that you put in them that makes the difference. For, you can employ teaming to get the work done, but you can also employ teaming to get the work done and to facilitate development and growth. And that the pillar practices are in this second to last outermost ring. So I said the third and fourth ring, I'm going to just share a little bit about planning, logistics, and design, and caring for the details. So one big detail, and it has to do with not only building personal connections but extending them, is how it makes a person feel when you actually address them by name. How do you feel when somebody remembers your name? I have the privilege of teaching about 100 aspiring principals every summer here at Teachers College in what we call the SPA program, and some of my fellow teachers are in the room with me today and with all of us. Thank you for coming, too. And we teach, so last summer we had 92 students. That's a lot of bodies in the room. And we all wear what we would call these placards. You know, they're like billboards that we wear, teaching team and all the students, so that we can get to know their names. And I cannot even describe what happens when the students take off their name tags and leave the room and we bump into them on the street and we know their name. It deepens personal relationships. It helps to create a space, and it helps them to understand how important it is for them as leaders to do the same. I mean, we study them, you know, their names, their pictures. If you work with smaller groups, you know, it's not as difficult, but that's like a little nuance that makes a big difference. And so I think, you know, there are many more hopefully valuable ideas that you will find if you either take out the book from the library or glance through it, including different kinds of protocols for building teams, creating safe spaces. How do we create spaces on teams and in groups and in schools and in organizations where people actually feel like there are norms? We've developed them together. We didn't just develop norms at the beginning of our work together, but we actually revisit them over time so that we can check in around how we're working together. Are there things that we want to change? Are there things that we can do better? How do we want to handle conflict? So having a set of living norms can be very helpful. Giving adults choices is really, really important. Not mandating that someone write. You know, some adults, they just don't like writing. And when they feel like they have to do something, it's a waste of time. So making sure that they know that, you know, we're all going to get this work done, but creating opportunities for them to kind of do things that feel comfortable for them, and designing spaces where that can happen is also important. Thinking about, you know, in a small group or in a large group, like, where do we sit? Who gets to speak? How do we create pockets for people to engage in conversation? What does that do when we do that? What do we model when we're facilitating? And transparency and pacing are also really important nuances. Just paying attention to how much can people actually take in. What do you do when you look at the room and, you know, people are, you know, looking like they're really filled up? What do you do? I offer them candy. And I mean, I do, but also it sort of means paying attention, like being with people. What's the rhythm? How much can they take in? When are breaks needed? When is discussion needed? What are we willing to let go of as facilitators? And starting with the small things, because those core elements that were in the center next to the dot, they actually infuse the entire model. So it's not like you just start with them and then they don't appear again when you're talking about design, or you're talking about logistics, or you're talking about pacing. They're everywhere. They're in it and in the room with you and with everyone else. So I thought that, coming full circle, you know, back to this idea of renewal and self-development, when we are responsible for supporting other people's growth, it's a gift that we're giving. And in order to keep on giving, it's like the pebble in the pond. Those ripples stop if we don't keep movement to keep that force going. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. I make a distinction in the book between how we renew ourselves and how we create opportunities for self-development. And those things can happen, you know, often I work with leaders and I ask them, what are the kinds of strategies that you use to renew yourself? And many people's first reaction is one of two. Most people say, what is renewal? And they're serious. Other people say, can you give me a few examples of what other people do to help me out here? I mean, that's how busy and full our lives are. So, in this book, I talk about how we can do that at the individual level, kind of one-on-one, different ways to renew and create opportunities for self-development. how working with a partner can be really helpful, how working in groups, both Victoria and I are coaches to the Con Fellows program here at Teachers College, and year after year we coach groups of principals and teacher leaders and assistant principals around their leadership challenges that they are conducting research around. They can be things like, you know, helping to build morale, or improve the school climate, or growing oneself as a principal, or building increased parent participation in different events. And so we meet with them. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow for about 4 hours every 6 weeks or so. And at the end of each session, they're given an evaluation to talk about what they valued most, what could be improved, what could the facilitators do to make their experience better. And time after time, what do you think the one thing is that they value a lot? It's a group that we're facilitating, and we're just kind of together for a period of a couple hours talking about their challenges. Yes?
That they've given themselves the time to talk about all this with others who are in the same boat.
Yes, that is exactly what they value. And in their shorthand, they say, time to talk. It's amazing. And then working with groups over time, if you have that luxury, that can also be a source of development and renewal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions. But before I do, I thought that I wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that all of you actually came here today from your busy lives and made space to be here for an hour and a half. So I wanted to thank you, first of all. And then I thought, you know, just in terms of your hope for yourselves, I think these images are really beautiful, and I hope you do too. And I'm hoping that maybe there's one image up there that is something that you'd like to hold on to remind you of something that you either found meaningful about what we've been talking about today, what you shared with your partner, and or something that you want to do for yourself in terms of creating a space to help you either renew or create more opportunities for development for yourself.
You've done a lot of work with lots of leaders, trying to help them become better leaders, more caring leaders. Are there people who can't learn the kind of skills or the kind of sensitivities or sensibilities that we're talking about here today? Are there people who just, for some reason, can't do it, and as a result of that, will not be highly successful leaders? That world. Are some people not going to be able to do this kind of thing?
That's very true. I think some people don't want to do this kind of thing either. So, I mean, this is not just what I do when I'm talking with groups about things that I write. This is like how I live my life, or at least I try to. So I think there are some people who don't think that this is important, and I don't think we can make anyone ever grow or force them to pay attention. I mean, in the business world now, there are some companies that not only have goals that relate to profit, but they have goals for leaders that that assess how well they're actually supporting other people's growth and development. But that's in the business world. So far, I haven't heard of that in the education world. And so your question, can everyone do this? I mean, that's why I began with that central dot, because it's, you know, people are you know, they pay attention to who you are as a person, and that shapes every experience they have with you. So I think people have the capacity to do this, but they have to have the desire to do it. That would be my answer. What would yours be?
I guess I'm concerned about a lot of leadership today, which is so dependent upon accountability that the pressures on leadership force them into behaviors that aren't like that aren't so caring, that are all about what I want as a leader to happen, and just get it to happen. That it's a top-down kind of mentality where, you know, you're under the pressure to have your school perform if you're a principal, And as a result of that, you just push and pressure people, and you forget about the human element here. And you also forget about complexity. I guess that's one of the huge things that I get concerned about it. You know, people say, you know, it's about the test scores, it's about growth, it's about all, you know, well, it's about people.
Yeah.
And it's about the people that you work with as adults, and it's also about the kids who come to school with their own complexity, right?
Yes,
Anyway, I get nervous, I get concerned about people who feel that kind of pressure and then translate that pressure into sort of punitive action and my way or the highway, and get, you know, emboldened by what they, and I think that it's the opposite. I think that the opposite matters, where you're paying attention to people and you're showing that you know them and that you care about, and then they blossom, and then you don't have to worry about pushing them.
Uh-huh.
So what you were describing as leadership at all, that's managership. That is not, you know, where you lean on people and do that. That's the difference between a leader and a manager. And some people have conflated those two, but they're as different as a giraffe and a rabbit, you know, in my humble opinion.
Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. Mhm. So we have another question. I don't know your name, sorry.
Oh, my name's Colin.
Hi, Colin.
Hi. So I feel like this will be a good follow-up, and then if I have to leave early, sorry, I have a class at 5. To your question and response, and what you said also about that's management, not leadership. So I was a teacher in Houston for 4 years before I came up here, and unfortunately, I served under 3 different principals, and 2 of them were managers. One was what I would call a leader by this definition that we had here. And I was wondering if you could speak to this idea of, at least it's been my experience. I know TC is a very progressive education institution, but it doesn't seem to be the norm in higher education programs that teach and train our nation's principals and school leaders. And so I wonder if there is not a tendency in those programs to teach management. Like I was looking at a lot of the, I'm not in the leadership program here, but when I was looking to apply to grad schools, a lot of the classes in the education leadership programs were very organizational. They were very managerial. And I was wondering if you think it would be good to sort of encourage a lot of these institutions from that level to have principals trained in developmental psychology for adults and for kids, so they know they're making good developmental decisions for the children that they serve.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I appreciate your question, Colin, and I definitely think that that would be a good idea. And so I not only work in university leadership preparation programs, both for aspiring principals, but also for aspiring superintendents and district leaders, and as well as working in practice with leaders who are practicing principals and practicing assistant principals, and time again, they said, I can't believe I've got 2 master's degrees or a degree in educational administration, and I've never had a class in how to help adults grow. And teacher leaders, you know, who are aspiring to be principals, I mean, I really respect and admire Teachers College and the Summer Principals Academy and our urban superintendent's program, because it is one of the few places where this is I mean, I had that slide up, I don't know if you noticed it, there was a quote which I skipped over very gracefully, said it's all about the kids. Yes, so this past summer, teaching in the Summer Principals Academy, aspiring principals, you know, they kind of come in, these are very talented leaders in schools, people who do professional development, they're talented teachers of different kinds, and you know, they come in and a lot of them are sitting there kind of wondering, why are we taking a course on adult development? Why are we doing that? It's all about the kids. I mean, why? It's a core course too. And it's so helpful to explain that if we really care about the kids, we also really need to care about the adults. Because a lot of very talented educators leave schools. This is something that really touches my heart, and you know, I've dedicated myself to this work for many, many years because of it. because they just don't have the capacity to say, stop, I can't do this anymore. So what they say instead a lot, and I still see this today, is I've really enjoyed my time here, but I'm going to go to graduate school now, right? So that's a long answer to your very thoughtful question. And so my response would be yes, I think that university programs that are preparation programs for anyone who's going to work in the school system, because teachers help each other grow too. It's not a top-down kind of a thing, and principals can help each other grow as well. And so that I would advocate for that definitely being part of the curriculum. And good luck in your class today. Peter?
Building on what Colin said and what you said, you were talking about the opportunity to sponsor growth in others is a gift that you can give, but it's also a gift that you get, because it occurs to me, there's a dynamic interaction between you and your students where, and I see it with you and Victoria, where the gyre just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding, because if you're not learning from everything around you, you're stuck back in an ossified state of living.
Yeah.
So if you could, I'd love to know more what is that a given, or is it something you can change? I mean, there are certain tendencies, but I think of those as something you can expand and expand and expand, but maybe not. Is that radio station WDNA, as a friend of ours calls it, where it's just inborn and that's how it is, or is transformation at that level possible?
I think so. I mean, I think so. And that's a really thoughtful question, and it also goes, so that's where we begin, and it's kind of also where we end. You know, self-development is, I mean, I think that's really important, especially if you're going to be trying to support other people's development. So it is a giving and receiving kind of thing, I agree, but if all you're doing is constantly giving, I think that people wear out. And that's why I think that refilling and renewing and paying attention to opportunities for self-development are also important. And yes, I mean, that's the hopefulness of this model, that we actually can change and grow as we move through our lives, regardless of our ages, provided that we have context and conditions that can actually help us grow. Yes. Your first name?
It's Jillian.
Jillian.
I liked what you said about what we pay attention to in the room, and I think so many times it's not what's being stated. In my work, we often talk about what the students are dealing with before they ever get into the classroom. And you use the word palpable to describe something else, but sometimes what that student is dealing with or feeling is palpable, and it's very much what's in the room. So we need to be able to give our teachers the space to recognize it and acknowledge it.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that. It's across all levels, you know, it's just...
So not actually a question.
No, it's insights, comments, reactions, all welcome.
I want to thank Jillian for saying something, anything, because the first 5 voices that we heard after your presentation were men, and I actually don't have anything to say, enough that I want it right now, because I'm thinking about it and I'm delighted about that, and want to thank you for that. But is developmentally or leadership-wise, or helping people to, educators to grow, is there any, did you notice that in the room? When you said you talk about paying attention to what's going on in the room, or what could you offer up about that? I mean, it's 80% women and 20% men, and yet that's what we heard.
So I'm going to speak completely transparently, okay?
Mhm.
Which is that I think the reason that the voices, at least two of the voices in the room who spoke first, Bob and I are pretty good friends, and he always asks a lot of questions. And I saw his hand go up, and I purposefully looked around because I wanted to see if there were any women who were raising their hand. And Peter and I are like family, and so I think Peter just offered that as a comment back to Bob, and I saw Colin's hand, and I am aware of it because you'll notice I keep, even though I've anchored myself on this side of the room, I've done that because I wanted to be close to this for some parts and over here for others. Yes, I did notice it. The other thing that I noticed, which I can see from up here, is that even though the women are not talking, I'm noticing a lot of head nodding and a lot of processing. So Shauna is someone with whom I've had the pleasure of teaching, and I can see her thinking. So I am aware of what's going on. And yes, that's a true statement as well. Thank you for
It's just curious.
bringing that to
I'm
our
still
attention.
struggling with the developmental elements of why that continues to happen, but your explanation helps.
Mhm. I mean, other people might observe other things. I have this privileged position, though, being up in the front, because I can actually look in your eyes, and I can see where I'm sensing whether or not you're kind of with me.
I know it's safe to speak.
Yes.
I wanted to just say publicly that the first course I took with you changed the way I lead. You know, because I was one of those leaders who came into teaching and said it's all about the children, and I really believed that until I took the adult development with you, and I actually changed, which is a good thing. I think I grew, you know, and that was very powerful in terms of the course that you taught, and it actually has changed the way I lead. But I was thinking about, as you were speaking about growth, Hurricane Sandy.
Yes.
And how in the school, you know, I was asking everyone, you know, how's your family, how are things going? And, you know, people were telling me about themselves and everything. But it was interesting because, and I was actually criticized by somebody by saying, well, you know, we didn't raise enough money to help other families and this, that, and the other. And I said, you know, quietly, you know, I spoke to a couple of staff members, and one teacher had lost her home in terms of her, and, you know, not for any brownie points, but I had offered her quietly, you know, my house, because I had moved out and was actually selling it, but there's some time between selling it and making it available. So I said, well, if you don't want to stay in the shelter, you can actually use my house. But this is not something I got on the microphone and made an announcement about. So it may appear to this one individual that I was being not sensitive to everyone. But, you know, I said to her, I said, you know, it's interesting because not one person asked me, how did I survive Sandy? You know, and I was without power for 7 days, you know, coming to work, but not. So in terms of, you know, it was just a thought that I had. And so as I was looking at the tree, that's my image right there on the bottom with the grass and the green, because you mentioned context and conditions for growth, and that's something that if I'm a tree and I have roots, how do I plant those roots in concrete? You know, how do I plant those in concrete?
I have goosebumps.
So that's all. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Bernard.
You're welcome.
Hi, Bernard.
Hello.
I'm Shauna. And a couple of things that you said really resonated, and it kind of goes to a question and a thought that I have about growing roots in concrete. And you said how much you grew from your experience with Ellie, your first experience, and I experienced that too in the class. And when we think about growth, so much of that growth, you had said, comes from that core circle, that care, respect, trust, and those are the things that allow the growth to happen in all of the other structures. What are the ways that you see, other than coming in contact with somebody who can model those those values and connect them to structures, how do you see growth happening when you are a leader that doesn't get the question asked back, when people don't know how to reciprocate that care, that respect, that flexibility? For me, that core circle is like that friendship bread, you know, that you take a little piece of it and it's like that starter for sourdough and you pass it on to people. And if you get a little bit of that friendship bread and that starter, then you can start something. But if you don't continue to feed it, it just goes, it gets flat. So unless you come into connection with somebody who can give you that friendship bread or somebody who can help you grow those roots and break up the concrete, what are the ways that you can help other leaders figure out how to start that care, respect, growth, so that all the other structures can really stay vital? Are there ways that you are researching that, or that you can guide us to look deeper into? That's my question.
Thank you for asking that, Shauna.
Thank you for making a safe space for our development.
So I love the image of the tree in concrete and the friendship bread. And I think, I think part of what we all need to do is to find a community of connection with, even if it's one other person that we can talk with. I mean, I just delivered a workshop at Learning Forward in Boston, and it was around, these ideas. And one of the things that I invited the leaders in that room to do was to connect, to take someone's phone number, to see if they actually wanted to stay in relationship, because they were all exposed to those ideas, and obviously they chose the session, they spent a whole day in it. So I think even having one partner, who's willing to talk with you and be present to you can make a tremendous difference in how we live and feel, and can be present to ourselves and to other people. And a lot of people, do that through different kinds of coaching. And a lot of people do that from just having a couple or one other person that they connect with regularly and over time. It makes a tremendous difference. Because otherwise, I know that was the image of the pebble in the pond. We cannot do this work alone. No matter where we're doing it, we cannot do it alone. We really need each other.